Welcome back to Alberta Primetime, and the vocal point now. The world may be starting to wonder whether Ottawa wants the foreign investment Alberta is working so hard to attain. What are federal decisions doing to our province? Our Monday Money panel is in. Todd Hirsch is ATB Financial's senior economist. Shafik Hirani is a director at Investors Group Calgary. And Claudia Catano is Western business columnist at the Financial Post. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello.
Claudia, what is the latest global reaction to the federal review process for companies looking to invest in Alberta's energy sector?
For sure, there's been a huge reaction globally. In fact, I don't think I've ever received so many calls from big investors from Wall Street to the UK to across Europe, and there's a lot of confusion about why is it that Ottawa all of a sudden is taking a bit of a pause in terms of approving these big deals. A lot of them have been approved in the past. And everybody's wondering what's causing all of this and what they should expect in the future. And
Petronas's bid really touching this off. Of course, the CNOC bid for Nexen still being reviewed by Ottawa, but Malaysia's bid in natural gas, essentially in Alberta, an industry that's suffering a glut, a bit of a surprise for some people. They're looking to not only improve the industry, but get exports moving off the West Coast. Is that something we want to be careful shutting down?
Well, I think we have to be careful when you're negotiating with any sovereign country or any investment that you're looking at into the country. I think it's a fascinating story because in so many ways, the federal government, they're in a kind of in a bad spot. They've spent the last 3 years trying to woo China, and they've asked China out on a date. And now China says, yeah, I'll go out on a date with you. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, we need some rules about what's going to happen on this date.
Right.
And I think that's what everyone's waiting to see is some of the guidelines and regulations around the foreign investment.
An interesting thing about the Petronas bids that some people don't realize is they could have taken some time and tweaked the deal and reapplied, but they wanted an answer right away, and they got one in the negative. Is pressure on Ottawa to set those clear requirements to let everyone know what the ground rules are? Is that pressure building? They've been promising this for 2 years.
Yeah, everyone's been waiting really to see this since the whole potash deal. I think the federal government maybe has been sidetracked a little bit. I mean, we were through the worst probably 3 or 4 years that the global economy has seen in our generation. So maybe you can cut them some slack. The federal government's been busy doing a lot of different things. What they didn't get around to doing, though, was laying out the guidelines for foreign investment. And now there is a lot of pressure on them to put together some rules.
The public's even becoming involved, and so that is real pressure that a politician would feel. Shafik, a recent poll by the University of Alberta's China Institute shows most Albertans, 59%, agree with promoting energy exports to China. But when it comes to investment in our energy by a company owned and operated by the Chinese government, 53% disagree that that's acceptable. Is government in our country struggling with that perception problem? Is it always just business?
Yeah, this is a very difficult situation for the government because there's a big dichotomy between what the shareholders and the owners of the companies like Nexen and Progress are saying and what the average Albertan's saying. And the average Albertan's clearly speaking here. They're saying we don't like it. And if you look at that China Institute poll, it was done before the CNOC Nexen deal. So this is a really tough situation. So Tony Clemente, the Natural Resource Minister, the Harper government, even the Redford government are coming up with some clarification on the Investment Act's net benefit to Canada ruling, and that is expected this week.
Claudia, the stakes are huge for Alberta, and perhaps there's a difference between investing and owning a natural resource where there's a tremendous amount of control. A top Beijing oil expert was in Edmonton last week and told an Oilsands conference the Chinese are confused by the criteria that seems to be on the table to evaluate takeovers right now.
Well, sure, they're confused like a lot of other people, but I think it's entirely appropriate for Canada to have this discussion. We are a sovereign nation. And I think perhaps people were quite surprised at the number of deals that had been made and that are still in the pipeline. The Chinese and some of the other SOEs as well have said they want a lot more of Canada's resources, but specifically China. China has a lot of money at this point, and they love they love oil and gas. And Canada should step back and decide whether it wants to accept so much investment coming from this part of the world.
Because it's not something we can do with the money in this country or province. True, Todd?
It's something we can do?
We don't have enough capital.
Oh, yeah, there's not nearly enough capital in all of Canada to fully, tap the potential, particularly in the oil sands. I think it's about 10 or 15% domestically.
People sometimes forget that.
Yeah, we need the foreign investment. Otherwise, we will be underperforming and underutilizing that resource. So we need the foreign investment. I don't agree that, we should worry or be fearful about it, but we can't be naive about this. We do need to go in with our eyes open. We do need to examine all of it. And I think we would be naive if we think that, China didn't have some different perspectives on what they're doing.
Another thing on the federal government's mind could be getting more Canadian exports into China. Next up, though, earnings are cut in half at Canada's biggest onshore driller. What could that forebode for oil field services in general in our province? And could a cross-border electricity partnership lower your power bill? Welcome back to Alberta Primetime and the Monday Money Panel. A cross-border deal and your electricity bill straight ahead. But first, Alberta energy giant Precision Drilling's net earnings have plunged $39 million, less than half what they were last year. Claudia, is there significance for the entire sector with these results?
I think they underscore that drilling activity has slowed down, actually both in Canada and in the United States, and that's because there's still a lot of uncertainty, and it's related to natural gas prices remaining quite soft, so we're seeing companies pull back activity on that level. But also we're seeing a slowdown in activity that's directed at oil targets as well. And that's a lot of it is related to uncertainty about pipelines. The good news is the fact that we're probably going to see an improvement as we get into 2013, especially if we get more clarity around pipelines, if we get some of those LNG plants that we're hoping to get on the West Coast, and perhaps gas prices continuing to increase a little bit as demand for natural gas increases.
What do you make of PD's news? There's an awful lot of Albertans employed in oilfield services.
Yes, there are, and a lot of the provincial economy really depends on the fortunes in the energy sector. I think it's a bit deceiving when, just regular Albertans, we might hear that West Texas Intermediate price, $85, $90. It sounds really high. The problem is that Canadian producers accept quite a discount from that, and on top of that, costs are really high right now for drillers and energy companies, developers. So those margins are really not quite as big as what it might seem like when you just look at how high oil is trading on the NYMEX. Right. These companies aren't really that flush in cash.
Shafik, Precision Drilling not the only company reporting. What are you seeing in the latest round of earnings?
Yeah, there's a lot of cutbacks, and I'm not sure if I should correct you or not, Jennifer, but I think it didn't plunge by $39 million. It plunged to $39 million.
Right.
Yeah, about 14 cents a share. And I think you're seeing the same trend across all the oil and gas integrateds, and they're due out on Thursday. You got a lot of TransAlta's out, Talisman's out next week, BCE is out, which is the parent company of this network. So there's a lot of earnings out, and you're seeing a lot of oil and gas companies cut their capital budget, so you can see a tight squeezing as you usually do see in the third quarter. So it should be an interesting week.
And Shafik, is that trickling into the hiring?
Yeah, if you look at one thing, just across the entire world right now, you're seeing when people announce these cuts in earnings, you're seeing them also simultaneously announce cuts in employment. So this doesn't pose well for not just the Canadian economy, but the U.S. economy, where you're seeing layoffs all across the newspapers. So it's going to be tight.
Claudia, is there some other companies, perhaps energy firms in particular in Calgary, that you're taking note of in terms of earnings reports out now?
I'm watching the integrateds. They're going to come out on Thursday, and they seem to be in a bit of a holding pattern. Affected a great deal by these differential in oil prices between Alberta and West Texas Intermediate. So the integrateds are able to recapture some of the losses in the upstream because they have refineries in the downstream. It's still a bad time for gas producers, and we saw that last week with Encana. So they reported a big loss, and a lot of it was related to the lower value of their gas reserves. They had to take a big write-down.
Todd, for just the average Albertan out there with hopefully an RRSP, things hard to understand. We heard slow but steady recovery, and things seem so bleak now listening to this conversation. The markets are closed, of course, in the U.S. today because of Hurricane Sandy. What do you expect for this week and maybe a broader outlook?
Well, one of the things I'll be watching for is Wednesday Stats Canada reports the GDP for August for Canada. And right now, you know, the U.S. economy, the Canadian economy, it seems to be a bit of a holding pattern, just kind of treading water. It's better than 10 feet below the waves. You know, we're not in recession, but neither economy seems to be gaining much traction. So August GDP numbers will be interesting to watch to see if the Canadian economy is picking up steam or more likely maybe losing a little bit of gumption.
Meantime, in Alberta, another story that will affect your pocketbook, TransAlta announcing a new partnership with an Iowa company to build natural gas-powered electricity plants here in Alberta. Claudia, is it a good plan for, you'd mentioned before, relatively cheap and very abundant natural gas? Is it a good plan perhaps for consumers?
Perhaps not so much for consumers in the short term, but it is a good plan for Alberta and Western Canada overall. So this is actually the good part of low gas prices. Because we have these low natural gas prices, it makes a lot of sense to build natural gas-fired electricity plants. And of course, we need a lot of this new electricity because there's a lot of development going on, whether it's the liquefied natural gas terminals on the West Coast or the oil sands or potash development in Saskatchewan. So a lot of these new plants need the power. And lower electricity prices in the long run are going to be good.
For now, though, it's an expensive project. Anytime new infrastructure is built, there's a cost. Will that be passed down to Albertans?
I'm not sure. I'd have to see some of the more detail of what TransAlta has in mind. But yeah, it sounds like they are building these over time. They are very capital-intensive projects. But they will, I think the power is intended mostly for the big industrial projects. It will eventually translate, I think, into some savings because it then does free up other electricity that's currently being generated.
We're almost competing with the plants for power.
In a way, yeah.
In our households. Shafik, is news of the deal impacting TransAlta's shares at all? Are you watching that for your clients?
Yeah, so far there hasn't been much movement. There was a little bit of a jump last week, but you know, these utility companies, they've struggled for the good part of about 2 years now, and they have excellent deals. I expect something to be positive here. The merger with Mid-American Energy to build these gas-fired plants, this is a company that's a subsidiary of Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, and if you have that backing, you should see, like Claudia and I were talking about, this is fruitful going forward. So it's positive news for TransAlta.
Thank you all for your time tonight. Todd Hirsch is senior economist with ATB Financial in Calgary. Shafik Hirani, director of Investors Group, and Claudia Catano, Western business columnist at the Financial Post.